Well, we appear to be live. I'm hoping. Hey, so everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Scott Berkey, and this is Dane Laughlin. We are facilitators of a community of extended reality practitioners called XR at Work. XR at Work exists to provide education and support and training and camaraderie for those of us that put extended reality technologies into enterprise. Dan and I have a podcast. We have a group on LinkedIn. We have regular meetings for our members. And so we are also partners and big fans of what Lucy Ashton is doing with MX.0 Southeast down in Greenville every year. We are proud participants and speakers at that conference. So please be sure to sign up. And we hope to see you in Greenville, South Carolina, April 17th and 18th this year. So today we have come together as kind of a pre-session or a warm-up for to kind of get to know each other a little bit before the event in Greenville. But Dan and I wanted to just share some thoughts. If you follow our podcast, which I'm sure maybe two of you on the call do, then you know that we like to just be very pragmatic and realistic about technology and give our honest and open opinions. And so this topic today about the possibilities for synergy between extended reality and artificial intelligence, we wanted to just share some of our experiences recently with the potential marrying of these two technologies. So I think to kind of start it off, Dane, do you even feel like XR and AI are ready to be in a marriage at this point, right? Have they dated long enough?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly we're in a nascent space, right? So even, XR, it's funny. I was thinking back on this the other day. Only 5 years ago, I was traveling around with a desktop computer and a wired, Vive in my in my luggage. So, it's still a pretty nascent space. What I will say though is that I think we certainly see the overlap between the two spaces, and then you can also see tools that are being developed in this space for developers. So an example, and we'll get more into this later on in the discussion, but like Unity just came out with their Unity Muse tool, which allows you to use AI to help develop content. And then there's a bunch of other tools that are coming out as well, helping with content generation, all kinds of things. So what I would say is I think the answer is yes, but I do think it's early. I think it's too early to tell what the killer use case will be, but certainly there's a lot of experimentation going on, and yeah, so I'm pretty excited about it. I guess you actually have some experience in the model generation space. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting because I see. You can't keep a good idea down, right? And so when AI hit the scene and started getting real popular, we started to see, and I think, not too surprising that we saw designers and creative types starting to use generative AI for model generation, for image generation. We see a fair amount of designers that are using it to create better and more realistic, perhaps, virtual environments and images. And so it's something I definitely see happening. It's definitely has a presence on the designer side. If you look at the shop that we all have, right, with designers and developers and different technologies, we see a fair amount of it with image generation. I know a lot of folks are afraid of this. It's going to take their job. But what I'm hearing is that designers are saying this is a great tool to augment what they're doing. But then I think you're seeing it more with another group within your org, right?
Yeah, so we're using it a lot in the development space, and I'll get to that here in a second. I am interested though, from the content generation side. Do you think that this? Well, so one of the things that we talk about frequently is the citizen developer, model, right? Like if you're required to use an internal team of 4 people, to do all of the development across the business, then the challenge that we run into is that you're going to be the bottleneck effectively for all the content. And so, do you think that this makes design more accessible to people that may not have had the ability to do it in the past, or do you think it like 10x's the design capacity of an existing team?
Yeah, I mean, is it going to take someone like myself who has no design prowess at all, right? I'm, colorblind and I have no sense of style, no background in design. Is it going to take someone like me and make me, a designer? Probably not, right? And the output that I would create through these applications through AI, certainly I couldn't do any modifications to it if I wanted to. I know how to crop photos in Photoshop, that sort of thing. But I don't know. I do think I think back to my earlier point is what I'm seeing is taking existing professionals and making them more efficient and effective in what they do. Not so much, in my experience, not so much taking chemical engineers and making them, virtual reality designers. I think
Right.
I don't know. I could be wrong. We'll have to take a look back at this in a couple of years at the recording of this episode and see how wrong I was. But
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting. I mean, I imagine it'll be a mix of both. So I think you'll get, increased output and quality from an existing team that knows how to use the tools. But it also feels like there's lots of opportunities for, like if I wanted to go in and create my own thing, certainly whatever generative AI helps me to build is going to be better than if I had to go and build
yeah,
it on my own with these separate tools. So yeah,
yeah.
you're right. It'll these predictions are always fun because we can come back and take a look at them later on.
I mean, but on your side about like with the coding, right? Is it going to take non-coders and make them coders, or is it going to take existing coders and make them better? What do you
Yeah,
think?
so that's a great question. And I actually saw a picture or a infographic that I liked the other day, and it was talking about all the different languages, and it says the new
Mhm.
coding language is English, and I think that's interesting. You know, because I think it makes it more accessible to a majority of people. That's really what I think generative AI is good at, is making skill sets accessible to people who you know don't want to like put in the time and effort to become a master at it. And so, in the case of the coding example, I mean, uh, for internal groups that are working on these types of equipment, not having to write as much code because you can offload a lot of that to ChatGPT or whatever of these tools. I think it's also not having to be proficient in multiple different languages, because if you're working on content that you didn't necessarily build, that you have bought off the shelf and need to adapt to something else, there's a lot of things that may not be directly in your wheelhouse, and so having a virtual assistant, if you will, to be able to ask and develop on has been incredibly helpful. Um, and then again, that citizen developer concept I think is really important. One of the most difficult things in this XR space is getting access to 3D content, right? So the
Mhm.
artist
Mhm.
and the 3D model example that you used earlier. And I think it's also access to the talent that can develop using the tools that are available. So Unity, is a great example, Unreal Engine. And I think the generative AI space makes those tools much more accessible to the average person. So it's my hope that from a business
Mhm.
perspective, what it allows us to do is broaden the market of people who can actually interact with this technology. And I think that's good for the industry overall.
I think you're right. Something I was thinking about, Dane, is that, I've been coding as a web developer for about 26, 27 years. And, back in the day, we were all worried that WYSIWYG editors, were going to take away web developers' jobs, right? Oh, crap. If every, administrative assistant in the world can go create a website, well, we're going to be out of work. It hasn't happened, right? It
Hmm.
does. It made the technology accessible for more folks. But it certainly didn't displace all the web developers in the world. And this seems a little bit similar to that. That's one of the benefits I have of being so old, is that I've seen this kind of before, where we thought the sky was falling and everything, a bunch of us were going to be out of work. But now with AI, it feels similar to me, Dane, like it's going to make the technology is going to make things more accessible, but it's certainly not going to take good, solid XR or technology professionals and put them out of work. It's just going to give them more tools to continue doing what they do.
Yeah. Well, and I think the secret, for enterprises is scale too, right? Which I think, the generative AI, space has a huge potential to offset the need for a very specialized team. So, again, if you think about, like your role or my role, we're very specialized. We focus on very specific things, and it would be difficult to scale that team, across to, let's say 15 people to support the whole business. And so I think you can offload, some of that capacity to also things like chatbots and other, aspects of it that integrate directly, with the feedback mechanisms for the team.
So it sounds like there's definitely a match between artificial intelligence and XR in our own house, right? So in corporate or on the agency side or wherever technology is being created, content's being created, right? Designers, developers, QA, that sort of thing, right? And so I'm glad to hear that. And we would encourage everyone, if you disagree, if you have a different experience, whatever you think, listen, we're happy to field your questions, to have your thoughts. I think someone's monitoring the comments. You're welcome to put your questions in along the way here if you like. But if we say that, yeah, it sounds like a thumbs up on the use of AI inside of our four walls, as it were, right? So you and I both work in industrial environments, right? And for in our day job in manufacturing companies, I know a lot of the folks that are here are from enterprise as well, right? So let's talk a little bit about what about the use of AI in, like from my example, a big thing for me is the use of AI in enhancing how we train and support frontline workers, be it in manufacturing or oil and gas or hospitality, whatever the case may be. I'm seeing some good uses of AI already, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. Some of the things that I'm seeing, right, is when we talk to other folks in the XR at Work community, colleagues or peers of ours across different industries, we see that they're using AI to make their existing training of frontline workers smarter, right? So it can detect how experienced or good you are at the procedure that it's presenting for you, and give you branched content or additional help or assets if you need it, versus if you're a more veteran worker, maybe all you need are just the settings for the different steps in a workflow, right? So we see that happening there for frontline workers for training. And I think the other big thing that we see as well is this kind of low-hanging fruit. I say everyone, I think a lot of people, a lot of companies have migrated towards, which is your standard AI chatbot. I've got a tablet, I'm on a factory floor, I have a problem or a question. Can AI, having indexed a lot of disparate data sources and file types, give me an answer that might take me too long to look up while this machine is down, right? And so we see AI in the hands and on the heads of frontline workers for training and reference materials in a smarter way. We're seeing those, right? What are you seeing out, on the factory floor? And maybe you're seeing those. Are you seeing anything that I'm missing there?
Yeah, well, I mean, you called out some really awesome use cases there. Like I think about like Squint, for instance, as an example of a tool that's done a great job of this, where you can take video and it cuts the video down into snippets. That's a pretty powerful. That's a pretty powerful capability. And so, I think they'll all be features that get generated as part of this. A great example would be if you're going through a VR training and you get stuck and you have a question, you can look over at the cobot that's with you and say, hey, how do I do this? And then generative AI responds to you in that way, or in a way that's helpful. And I think other examples would be from like a more soft skills perspective. One of the challenges we've had in the soft skills game is that you have to write out your script, right? So as nice as it is to kind of talk with an avatar and feel immersed in the space and all that stuff, the challenge that you run into is that it still feels like a very canned conversation, like it was pre-planned. You're just kind of going through the script, whatever. I think there's a huge opportunity for bots trained on particular things that you're trying to teach people. So maybe this is the angry bot, and the whole point of the training is to be able to have tough discussions, right? And so the bot's designed to kind of give you sass and see how you react to it, help develop supervisor skill sets. So I think it gives a lot more flexibility to the types of content that can be generated on the fly. And it also removes the need for development teams to try and plan out a lot of scripting or dashboarding or whatever ahead of time. And instead, if you train the model effectively enough, you can have that conversation with a bot effectively.
Right.
So
right.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton, here. Another thing that is tough, I think, in the whole industrial space is kind of knowledge capture of workers, right? So like you have your 30-year operator, right? They know a lot of things, and we can't download from their brain yet. So what are the best ways to engage those employees in conversations with like generative AI bots that can document the stories that they have and the things that they say, so that future generations of operators or whoever can come in and start to have those conversations?
That's a good point, because we talk a lot about how can AI assemble and surface information for the frontline worker. But, the other side of that, right, is that crabby old veteran workers in a factory, right, if that may be hesitant to help create training content, if they can just interact with AI to inform the model of what they're doing and some of their tips and tricks and the knowledge that they have, that information can then be used and resurfaced, right? So it's not just surfacing content for the user in the factory, but it can be capturing that knowledge back and holding it, so it becomes that kind of dual purpose platform, right? And I think that's brilliant. And I think, like you mentioned, Squint. I know Squint's making great strides in this, and they're a sponsor of MX.0 Southeast. We want to mention that. And there's other sponsors. There's other companies that are sponsoring MX.0 Southeast and that are using artificial intelligence. And I think I'm looking forward to exploring this more when we get together in Greenville.
Mm-hmm.
But I think knowledge capture is brilliant.
Yeah, well, and it's a problem that everybody has, right? We talk about this from the industrial space because that's the world that we come from. But I mean, this is a problem that we have across the board, in every industry and team, within any business. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity for, in the past, a challenge that we would have is if you wanted to document something that somebody knew, you essentially had to follow them around or have somebody kind of shadow them and take notes, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's an opportunity to replicate that at scale without having human involvement and be able to document and kind of save that information over time.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like AI is benefiting our internal teams, augmenting the efforts that we have going on internally. It's helping with knowledge capture and knowledge transfer back to our frontline workers. It's really starting to now. Of course, spoiler alert: we knew this before we got on the call today, but it does sound like it's really starting to have a positive impact on how we train and support frontline workers and how we create better content and more realistic content that resonates better with frankly, with a younger workforce. Gen Z is not. I got smart Gen Z kids, but they can't operate a 3-ring binder. I always say that, right? If they're listening, I'm sure they're cringing right now because they do know how to operate 3-ring binders. But by and large, we've got to put tools in place in our industrial environments that are going to meet our Gen Z workers and Gen Alpha behind that where they're at, right? What else are we seeing? So, I know something that you're real passionate about, right, is how we gain data insights and predictive analytics, and how AI can play a part in that. I mean, tell me what your thoughts are there. What are you seeing, as both of us talk to a lot of folks out in industry? What are you seeing around the use of AI on the data side?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple things in this space that I'm, pretty passionate about. I think one is uh, the analytics of the actual, trainings themselves, right? So one of
Yeah.
the most valuable pieces of doing XR training is that you actually get behavioral data of how people are interacting with their environment. So, for instance, if I go and I look through the analytics and I see that somebody is missing in like what's called a fire extinguisher training, they're not
Mhm.
looking at the gauge, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, now I can give very specific feedback to help them get better at that task. Whereas, if we were going through a PowerPoint, training or something like that, you're not going to have the ability to catch some of those things that maybe people, aren't incorporating into their, or they're not learning, from the actual training
Mhm.
itself. And so I think just as kind of an auditor to the overall training process, I think it can help us kind of, I guess, surface insights from the data that's being generated as part of the training itself. So I think that's a big piece. I think it's also, if you think about all of the equipment, all in every business, there's relationships that are formed between different parts of the process. So
Mhm.
in my case, like if a pressure sensor goes down over here, we know that it's likely to cascade into these other things that end up
Mhm.
happening. And so if we can use generative AI to start monitoring all of the interactions that are happening across a facility, and then start making suggestions based on prior situations that have happened. So I could say, hey, last time I saw that this vibration sensor went a little crazy, it means that we have to change the bearing in this motor, kick that off, and be able to uh, you know start thinking about how do we take the asset down now? Do we wait until we actually have some downtime?
Mhm.
And you can start to prioritize certain things like that. So I think that that's a really powerful application, just because uh, it's been hard. Like in the past, a lot of these monitoring technologies, you have to assign like, hey, we're going to monitor one, two, three, things, and a lot of times those three things depend on a subject matter expert
Yeah.
being able to tell you these are the three things that actually matter to you and you should be watching out for.
Mhm.
I think now, with the way things are going, we'll be able to, instead of relying on the subject matter expert to set up every alarm across every facility, instead you can start to like kind of monitor and understand the relationships between all these different things, and kind of auto create alarms and say like you should care about this, right? And then
Right.
so I think from a scale perspective, that's much easier than trying to have like a subject matter expert go through and build out a full alarm suite.
I get this when I go to factories, Dane. I get the subject matter expert that says, "Well, hey, but that's my job, right?" And I don't necessarily always say this, but sometimes I'll say, "But then you're not always there. You're not always accessible. You're not always right there focused on this. And so if it's your job, right, why does unscheduled downtime outages happen on the production line, right? Well, this and this, and I've got other places to be, and I've got, other things, and there's an art and a science to it. And that's my point there with them then is that, but we want to put processes in place, like we're talking about with AI, that can provide some of that insight and that expertise when you're in the restroom, when you're out sick, when you're focusing on something else, right? So, again, it's not to replace those experts, but it's to take some of what they do and make that automated so that we have less outages, because you and I both know that that's the big cardinal sin of manufacturing, right? Is that production line stopping. And so, if we can do something that helps have less outages, that's got to be a good thing, right? And I would hope that those veteran workers, those subject matter experts, are on board with that, right?
Yeah, Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think rationalization of, alarms is another, important thing. So being able to
Yeah.
understand, is this thing actually important, or is it just, something that's being like, that a sensor's gone haywire or something like
Mhm.
that. So being
Mhm.
able to monitor those things and kind of prioritize and lift up what's valuable to show to the worker, I think is where there's a lot of value, here, and doing it in an unstructured way. We've been able to do a lot of these things for a long time, but it's just taken a lot of effort to be able to do them. Again,
Mhm.
it's either a lot of effort or very specific people with skill sets,
Yeah.
like, having 30 years of experience and understanding how this pump connects to this vessel, which connects to this thing,
Yeah.
and having a full picture. And so I think where generative AI can be really helpful is, we can offset some of the requirements that are needed today to be able to do that, and instead allow for, generative AI to do some of those.
Because that guy that's been there 30 years is not going to be there maybe 31 or 35 or 40, right? And so we've got to look for the longevity, sustainability of our efforts in our company, right?
Yeah.
My employer, your employer, are going to be around long after you and I retire,
Mhm.
and so we certainly need to keep that in mind.
Well,
Hey, yeah, go ahead.
sorry,
You
Scott.
got a
So
question? Go ahead.
yeah, a question I have for you.
Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about how these technologies are great and can impact a business. I think it's also important to talk about maybe some of the downsides of the generative AI, space, hallucinations, those types of things. So, do you have any insights on how companies should kind of think about this, or what guidance you give to employees as you're talking through some of these tools?
Yeah, I mean, just from my experience in the last few months, so one of the things that I've seen is that we tend to think that um, a poorly executed demonstration of AI to frontline workers um, is going to win them over, right? That if we, everyone's not as enamored with this technology as maybe we are as technologists, right? And we think that, well, if we go put an AI chatbot on a tablet and put it in a frontline worker's hands, they're going to just fall in love with this. But you can show demos too early, right? You can show demos of AI chatbots with 7 documents indexed by the LLM. That's not very impressive, right? You're not going to get good results, and you're going to actually um, run some people off, so to speak, right? So I think maybe a little bit of overconfidence and claiming victory, putting a flag in AI too early in manufacturing. I've seen a little bit of that where it's well-meaning, uh, trigger happy folks, right? Start trying things and maybe moving it to production or putting it in place too early. I've seen a little bit of that. And I think that we just need to remember that this is just like anything else, right? Until it's ready for prime time and it's thoroughly thought out and designed and built and tested and tested and tested and tested, it doesn't need to go on the factory floor, right? And so let's not just assume that some mythical AI technology that we don't really understand is going to go solve a bunch of problems the day we put it on the factory floor. So I think
Mhm.
some overconfidence is something to watch out for. What are you seeing? Any downsides that you're seeing with the use of AI in manufacturing?
Yeah, like technology moves faster than culture, right? And so I think anytime something new like this, uh, like new technology comes out that's this disruptive, I think a lot of times it's kind of we're catching up for a long time. And so I think what I'm seeing is just an overall perspective that we should all have is like this thing's not an oracle, right? It's giving you a response based on things that
Yeah.
the data set that it has. And so don't take everything that's said as, take it with a grain
Right.
of salt. It should
Right.
be kind of an advisor more than it is telling you exactly what to do, which is why I think particularly in manufacturing you have to be really careful, because if you use it on something that's critical and it gives somebody the wrong response and it's not thoroughly tested enough, then
Mhm.
people can actually get hurt,
Right.
right? And so I think starting with use cases where the relative risk is pretty low. So again, like the knowledge capture is a great example of, like, if it misspeaks on on something that somebody told it, probably not a huge deal. we can go back and edit that, all that stuff. If it misspeaks and gives you the wrong thing for a procedure, now that becomes an issue, right? So I think
A
it's
production or a
rationalization.
safety issue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's rationalization of the risk profile,
Right.
for the space too. And then, another key aspect of this, I think, is also, you know, if you think about the operator that you were talking about, that has a bunch of experience, they're not likely going to want to sit down at a computer and type into, a chat interface,
Yeah.
and give them their life story type of thing. And so I think the user interface becomes very important in this context. And how do you integrate it into the actual day-to-day work that people do? Because if you just rely on somebody to sit down and type out, a bunch of chats, to a Gen AI, I don't think it'll be very successful.
Right. Hey, so Dane, I think great points, right? I mean, like any new technology, we need to, one of my favorite quotes, actually by Dr. Brian Laughlin, you may know him, right, is that we are both purveyors of and protectors from the same technology in a lot of cases, right? Your father's a smart man, Dane, and so we're hawking technology. Is what we do for a living, right? Is we're trying to put emerging technologies out in use in industry, but we have to be protectors from some of this technology and remind people of some best practices for anything. AI, uninformed AI enthusiasts, right, can go potentially do more harm than good. And so it's something we want to be careful of. But hey, I want to come back to something you brought up earlier. Mike Demos from Op Exchange put a question in. I want to just touch on real quick about the use of XR in the human resources arena. You touched on soft skills, right? And it's something that I think it's important to bring up because this is one of the first things that I started to see artificial intelligence used for is soft skills training and how to have difficult conversations, how to read a room, how to get body body language cues from the person you're talking to. Are you seeing much use of AI as it relates to like virtual reality soft skills training? Right. I think you guys do more of this than we do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, like I was saying earlier, the biggest challenge in that space is in order to get a lot of value. My perspective is that in order to get a lot of value from the soft skills training, it has to be kind of a choose your own adventure type of situation. It can't be, step by step, because if it's step by step, then you might as well read like a PowerPoint or, do like
Right.
a in-person
Speech,
conversation. Yeah, exactly. And so I think where the generative AI piece comes into play there is that, again, it's that choose your own adventure type of situation. I think what the difficulty is when you get away from the pre-planned responses into this more generative AI space is it's harder to grade, because it's a lot less, like usually the way that these things work is like if you select this answer, which is the best answer, you get 3 points. If you select the medium answer, you get 2. And so I think being able to grade, open kind of free range responses are more difficult. So I think the metrics that you have to look at for that type of content change, right? Which I think they still get, you get more value out of it, but I think you have to think about the way that you determine success for those types of projects a little bit differently.
Yeah. I think, when I think about the use of AI in HR functions, right? I mean, certainly guys like us tend to migrate towards the use of AI for virtual reality soft skills training, right? How to have difficult conversations, how to counsel an employee, making sure that you're not showing racial or gender bias in conversations that you're having with other people. There's a lot of good uses of soft skills training in virtual reality, and absolutely so with the use of AI incorporated into to make the training better and more effective. We see a little bit as well with the use of AI in HR functions around maybe some non-XR tasks that happen within HR functions. But Mike, good question. I would say this is something if you're going to be in Greenville, man, we should sit and talk about this. I'd be curious to get your take on it as well, Mike. So thank you for the question.
Well,
So I think, by and large, I don't know if we have any other questions because we can't see the questions, but I know that we're sitting right about 35 minutes out of a 45-minute deal. So I would say, if you have questions, please absolutely reach out to us. We'd love to talk and engage and discuss all the above. But Dane, let's just kind of recap, if we can, a little bit about kind of some key ways that we're seeing AI used in harmony with extended reality technologies. So we've talked about a few things. What are some key takeaways you would have for our friends on the webinar today?
Yeah, so I'll give a recap of what we talked about, and then one last thing that just kind of came to mind that's a little bit separate from where we've been. I think number one, there's absolutely a space for generative AI in the XR space. I think there's some known good solutions already in the market that are starting to address challenges with the kind of combination of the two things. I would also say though that these are early days. I wouldn't pick a winner, for the generative AI space, because I think if you go all in, it's very similar to the advice that we give a lot of the XR practitioners when they're looking at like new devices. It's like, buy one first, right? Don't jump into buying 500.
Or do a plant. Don't go do 500 plants in the first month.
And so I think it's the same concept, nail it and then scale it type of thing.
Yeah.
I think, be able to, I got Scott with that one.
Nail it and scale it. I like it, man. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then I think, the other aspect of this too is, the human part of this. We don't want to force people, back to your purveyor and protector, comment earlier. We shouldn't be forcing people into using things in a way that break the kind of value process that they provide to a business, right? So we need to be thinking about how do we integrate both XR and generative AI, or them together, into the work process, such that it's a net value add for people as opposed to just additional, things to do.
Yeah, and I would put an accent on that point, Dane, that if you're passing down edicts from your ivory tower, as it were, in corporate down onto the factory floor without having actually spent a lot of time on the factory floor, right? Then you're part of the problem, right? We need to win the shop floor. We need to win those moments. We need to be bringing value to the frontline operations in our businesses. And we have a myriad of tools that are available to us, like you said, Dane. But let's not just start letting AI be the thing that we just go start randomly putting in place without really understanding the positive and potential negative impacts that it may have on the lives and the day-to-day and the safety of those frontline workers. I think we've always got to start from the shop floor. We've always got to start from what it's like to be an operator on the front lines of manufacturing. And I think you bring up good points. Yeah, absolutely, buddy.
And then the point, or the last thing that I wanted to talk about too is, generative AI and XR are really just kind of modalities for interacting with the data. There's a whole other side of this, which is what do you need to have in place before you can actually be successful in implementing both XR, AI, all that stuff. And so I just wanted to call that out because it's the unsexy thing that nobody likes to talk about, is like data structures and all that stuff. But it's incredibly important to the overall success of some of these applications, because for instance, if your generative AI bot has access to every document in the world, it may not give you a specific enough answer because it has too much. The example that I always use is we don't need our procedure bots to know a lot about Star Wars, right? Because it doesn't apply to the things that we're working on. And so I think making sure that your data across the business is in a structured and clean manner will do many favors to be able to help scale a lot of the technology. So
absolutely.
Anyway.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more about this and getting some feedback from other folks that are on the call today, or that we see in Greenville at the MX.0 Southeast event in April. Just want to thank everyone for being here. Dane, thanks for being here, man. I know you and I both have busy day jobs, but we're always willing to take time out to talk to other XR practitioners and other folks in the industry. So just remind everyone, be sure you sign up for the event in April, MX.0 Southeast, and check out our podcast, and check us out on LinkedIn. We are XR at Work, and I want to give a special shout out to everyone from the XR at Work community that is that's on the call today. We love you guys, and we're proud to be in a group of practitioners with you, bringing technology to the shop floor that benefits our employers and its frontline workers. So thanks again, Dane. Good job, buddy.
Yep. Thanks, Scott. Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of your day.